I don't have the answers for how do you 5 steps for how do you parent a kid through grief. But I think your presence, for my kids, my presence in their lives has been the first one, at least. That might be the first step.
Welcome to this week's edition of First Person. I'm Wayne Shepherd, and today you'll meet an author who's also a young husband and father experiencing grief following his wife's death from cancer. Jerel Law is our guest today, and he'll tell his story in just a moment. The people who are profiled each week on First Person come from all walks of life. Their stories are remarkable because they tell the story of God at work, transforming lives and calling men and women to faith and obedience. You'll hear Jerel's story today, but there are many more interviews archived in an audio file found at our website, firstpersoninterview.com. You can listen to any of these conversations on demand by clicking on the Listen button at firstpersoninterview.com. And don't forget to visit us on Facebook as well, facebook.com/firstpersoninterview. Jerel Law is the author of Spirit Fighter, an adventure tale for young readers based on images and stories from the Bible. But this author's own tale is one of heartache and sorrow mingled with the hope of the gospel. Jerel's wife, Susan, fought a long battle with cancer and now is home in heaven while Jerel and his children remain here for a little while. The most important part of Jerel's story is very personal, but we started talking about his book, Spirit Fighter.
Well, the book has been a lot of fun. In 2009, had an idea for a book, and I'd been writing for maybe 10 years with honestly not very much success, but I began to think about, my kids at the time were 10, 8, and 5, and I began to think about books that they might want to read, and they were reading, in fact, some books in the sort of mainstream middle grade fiction world that are great books, but also didn't have much of a Christian background, and I began to look around and wonder where are those books that could encourage my kid but also keep their attention. And at the same time, I came upon a story in the Bible, just sort of the mysterious passage about Nephilim in the book of Genesis that intrigued me. It always intrigued me, but a story kind of jumped on the page for me at that point, and I began to ask some what-if questions. What if Nephilim still existed in the world today? These half-angel, half-human creatures, and what if one of them, lived down the street and had kids? And what if those kids had powers that came from being part angel? And so the story was born out of number one, an idea that I had, kind of a spark, and number two, I wanted to write something for my kids that they would enjoy. And quite honestly, all the success that I was looking for was that they would be engaged by the story and that they would enjoy it.
So this is an imaginative adventure kind of story, right? And kids need this kind of genre, don't they?
Well, when I grew up, I read, at this age, I started reading a lot of Frank Peretti, This Present Darkness, and just, such an inspiring and engaging story for me as I began to think for the first time about what's this spiritual world like, and what does it look like? And the reality is kids these days are reading all kinds of literature, and there's a huge chunk of the fiction market for middle grade young adult readers, and yet in the Christian world, they're just, I think we've struggled lately to connect with these kids. And so there's a huge need, I believe, for compelling stories that will illustrate who God is and what this life is about, and the fact that it's exciting, and there's a spiritual world that's real, but it can be tricky to capture their attention.
You have to be already working on number 2 and beyond, aren't you?
Well, I've been fortunate enough with Thomas Nelson, who's been a terrific publisher, that we are practically finished with number 2, and I'm getting ready to start number 3 in this series, this Son of Angels series. So just very excited about that. And for me, it all kind of came unexpectedly and a bit out of left field, but it's one of those situations where God began to open up doors in front of me that I began to walk through with this first book, Spirit Fighter.
It's been out for a little while now, and are you encouraged, surprised, pleased with the reception it's getting?
Well, it's only been out at this point for about 2 months. We did have a release connection with Walmart, where they had it in certain stores, and that was encouraging to see that they wanted it. But the most encouraging thing to me is talking to my kids' friends. My kids are now 12 and 10 and 7, and my older two, especially, as their friends read it and want to, it's just funny. They want to come down and have me sign their book or talk to them about it, and that is all a surprise to me, as well as just an encouragement that, hey, you know what? It's connecting with some kids and some kids that we know, and hopefully speaking to them about God and about His truth in their lives. And so far so good. We feel really good about the way the sales have gone, and encouraged to see it continue to get in some kids' hands.
Delighted to hear that, Jerel. Now, the reason I really wanted to talk to you today is that intertwined with the writing of this book and the publication of this book is a personal story. And a friend of mine, a mutual friend of ours, told me about a blog that you were writing. I think I started looking at it around 2010 or so. And it had to do with a diagnosis your wife received. When did that all start to happen in your lives?
Yeah, in 2008, my wife was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. And that was in February of 2008. And it began this very unexpected journey for us. And I mean, literally one day we're totally fine and thinking everything is great, and the next day she has a test and we get a call from the doctor. And it began this journey. And so she was diagnosed in 2008, began treatments that year, radiation and chemotherapy and surgery, and made it through those really, really well, and yet had another recurrence of the same cancer, still local, and that took us into 2009 with treatments and that whole process, and so she continued on and really a 3-year battle with breast cancer that every time she turned a corner in her treatment, a door was that we prayed would be open was shut. And so she had her final recurrence in the fall of 2010, where it had spread in multiple locations in her body, and her health began to spiral downhill at that point. And January 1st of 2011, Susan passed away, and so that is a huge part of our story, of my family's story over the past few years, has been walking with her through that and watching her fight so bravely and gracefully, and yet struggling with losing a spouse, losing my wife, and we'd been married for 15 years. She was my partner, my wife, my ministry companion, and everything else, and then of course with our kids, struggling with losing their mom and dealing with all those things. So yes, in the middle of this writing thing, a much bigger thing was going on in our lives that we were walking through. In fact, the night I remember so clearly, the night that we received her diagnosis for the very first time, you just feel like everything's caving in. And in fact, we were sitting on my couch, and we watched American Idol a lot, and that was one of the things we did together. And I just remember sitting there listening to someone on American Idol sing the old Beatles song Yesterday, and just falling apart and weeping as I was listening to those words, where it says, yesterday all my troubles seemed so far away, and now it seems as if they're here to stay. And the weight of this thing hit us both, and so absolutely, Wayne, that's been an enormous part of our lives, has been watching her move through that and seeing God in the middle of that, and oftentimes wondering where He is and what He's doing, and that seeing His presence and feeling His presence in our lives over and over again. So many stories I could tell you about that.
Oh, I hope we have time to tell some of those today, and I want to talk to you more about the kids, but tell me more about Susan. What was Susan like?
Just an amazing, beautiful person, and everyone that knew her would say the same thing. To know her is to love her, and if you knew her, then you knew that she cared about you. You knew that she put your feelings and you ahead of her, almost to a fault. That she was kind and always had a smile on her face, and some of the neatest conversations I've had about her have been with people in our neighborhood, both people who would call themselves Christ followers and people who aren't, who would all say the same thing, that she loved them, that she cared about them, and she was just an amazing person. We met in college, and as a part of a campus ministry at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And the first time I saw her, she was leading worship in a campus ministry, and I knew that she was someone special. And as we got to know each other that year and started dating, that was it for me. I mean, she was beautiful and just beautiful on the outside, but just radiated this beauty on the inside that I realized pretty soon was God's hand in her life, was Christ radiating through her, and very attractive to me as a young college student who wasn't sure which end was up. But
you were smitten, weren't you?
I was, and I'm grateful that God led our paths to cross, because otherwise I'd who knows. But she was an amazing person. I miss her dearly.
More insights from author Jerel Law coming up today in the second half of this edition of First Person. Next time we're together, you'll meet Mark Gregston, a man who has dedicated his life to helping troubled teens.
I think I'm just a normal guy doing a normal thing of meeting with kids, and that's it. I don't get inflated in any arena, but I do look back at my life and I go, the older I get, the more that I see that God has had a plan.
A very personal conversation with Mark Gregston of parenting today's teens. We'll learn the whole story next time on First Person. Writer Jerel Law is with me today on First Person. His book is Spirit Fighter from Thomas Nelson, and you'll find more information about that on our website, firstpersoninterview.com. But Jerel, the reason I wanted to talk to you today is because of what your family has gone through. You have 3 children, right?
That's right.
And your wife Susan passed away in January of 2011. Your kids must have been pretty young when she was first diagnosed with cancer.
They were. My daughter was 8. At the time, and I had a 6-year-old. We have a 6-year-old, and we had a 6-year-old at the time and a 3-year-old.
Wow.
And so they were all at different levels of understanding at that time of what she was going through, of going to the doctor a lot, of going to these treatments. She began to lose her hair because of the chemotherapy treatments, and that was definitely one of those things that obviously they noticed immediately and is shocking to them as kids, that one of those first signs that wow, something's wrong here. And so there, my 3-year-old, all he really knew was her going through treatments, and so it was pretty normal for him. My daughter, my middle son, we had different conversations with them about what was happening, and Susan's focus was always to bring a positive but honest approach to our conversations with them.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, because for that 3-year battle, who encouraged who the most, and in what ways?
Well, it's such a great question, and it reminds me of something that she posted on her blog. She started a blog pretty early on into her treatment, but as a way to update people about her condition, and also just to tell some stories that were not related to cancer, because she just didn't want to be defined by this ugly thing alone. But one of the times that she wrote, one of the stories, and one of the stories that people bring up to me the most, is when she wrote one day right after we had gotten news of another recurrence, asking for people to lift her up and to have faith for her. And she referenced that story, that just amazing story of the friends who lowered their sick companion to the feet of Jesus through the roof. I was just
reading that in Mark, right?
Yeah, I mean, what an amazing picture of faith. And you remember in that story, Jesus he commends them for the friend's faith, and he heals because he says, look at the faith of your friends. Look what they've done. They've dug through this roof and lowered, the audacity, right, to do something like that in front of all these other people who are trying to listen to Jesus, and all of a sudden, dirt begins to sprinkle on the floor, and you look up and there's a person being lowered through. Well, Susan latched onto that, and she just asked people in her own humble kind of way, please be my faith for me today, because I'm struggling to have enough on my own. Now, the reality was, if you knew her, she was the most faithful person I knew. And so for her to ask that was just an amazing, impactful thing. So who carried who through? I think there were times where my faith was an encouragement to her, and the strength that our kids and the resilience that our kids showed was an encouragement to her. But I would also say, as much as we lowered her to the feet of Jesus, I just believe, and this is for my whole relationship with her, that she lowered me to his feet all the time in the way that she prayed for me and encouraged me, in the way that she had faith for me. And I would say even through the treatments, to be an encouragement that God's still good. And in fact, one of the things that she wrote to me late in her treatment, and really late in her life, was this encouragement. Jerel, just remember that in spite of what we're going through, God is still good, and I want you to remember that. And so I think we encourage one another. But as I look back on it, I think, probably way more than 50-50, she encouraged me in the middle of her own struggle and her own pain.
Jerel, sometimes we talk about loss in terms of, you'll get over it in time. The fact is you never get over it. But what has life been like for this past year and a half or so with you and the kids?
Well, you're right in that you never get over it. I whenever I would hear people kind of say in different ways, why don't you just kind of buck up and get over it? No one really said those words, but occasionally, you hear that in different ways. I go, I don't think I'm going to get over this, but I think I'm going to walk through this. And I was telling a friend of mine the other day, I feel like you don't get to choose the road that you walk on. You get to choose how you walk down it. And so this last year for me has been a lot of starts and stops, a lot of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, a lot of days where I've felt, quite honestly, hopeless and alone. And then there are other days where I sense that God hasn't left me, and that he hasn't left my kids, and that he, as confusing and mysterious and hard as this is for us, that he does have a plan that he's working out, and that he's going to take something awful and make something good out of it. And so it has not been smooth sailing by any stretch of the imagination, but I can tell you, Wayne, that as I stand here today, I'm in a different place than I was a year ago, and that's good. That there's forward progress in my life and with the kids, and we are working through this, and we're not going to let it, even though it has changed us and it has marked us, we're not going to let it entirely define us. Mm-hmm. And so we are moving forward and moving through it in the best way that we know how. And I would also just say that more than anything we've done, it's just been an overwhelming sense of God's grace in the middle of it, almost living in this umbrella of His goodness and grace. And I don't say those in a trite way or lightly, and I hope people don't hear that as a Sunday school answer, because trust me, it's not. it's from the real, born out of this real pain of losing someone. Until you've experienced that, you can't explain it, can you? It's hard to explain, and I find myself, struggling at times to put into words what is this? What has this last year been like? And in explaining it to someone who maybe hasn't gone through it can be difficult. But yeah, there's a very clarifying and prioritizing thing that happens in this for us.
Well, of course, not only did you need to grieve personally, but you had to be a dad at the same time. Describe that experience, and I'm sure your kids had different reactions at different times, but talk about parenting during a time of grief.
Well, the good news is that it seems that we all have gone through different stages at different times, that we aren't all dealing with the same thing at the same time. All of my kids are different, and some of them internalize things a little more, and I have some that will, my middle son in particular will externalize things a little more, and it's all good.
That's lesson number one, isn't it, that we all grieve differently?
We do. In fact, as I was sitting with a counselor last year who's become a really good friend, Roger, one of the things he said to me was, I can tell you the process of grief and the stages of grief. What I can't tell you is what order they're going to go in for you. And I thought it was a very wise thing to say, and he helped really guide me through this last year, but also to be able to apply it to my kids and say, you know what, it's true for them too. They're going to deal with things differently. They're going to pretend like everything's fine, and a lot of times they do feel fine, and they feel like having friends over and laughing and playing, and that's all good. And my goal has been to be there for them wherever they are, and to also let them know along the way that wherever they are is okay. Like it's okay to cry. It's okay not to cry. It's okay to feel excited about something in your life. It's okay to be sad. And along the way, I don't want them to get stuck, in a certain pattern of behavior or in a way of dealing with things that is destructive. But also just because I think that I've felt the grace extended to me from others, just to be okay with where I was and not to try to make it, to put myself further down the road than I am. I hopefully I've been able to extend that to the kids and just help them, when they're ready to talk about it, when they want to talk about it, encourage it, but not to force it, and not to force them to deal with things that maybe they're not ready to deal with, or and realizing this is a process. This is going to take years, and like I said, it does mark us, and it will change their lives. It has changed their lives, and so. So I think, I don't have the answers for how do you, 5 steps for how do you parent a kid through grief. But I think your presence, for my kids, my presence in their lives has been the first one, at least. That might be the first step.
Well, as you might imagine, there is more to this story than we have time to share today on First Person. Anyone who has experienced this kind of loss knows that there are good days filled with hope and difficult days as well. Since Susan's death on New Year's Day in 2011, Jerel has continued to write and blog about his grief experience, and we've placed a link to Jerel's own website at firstpersoninterview.com. When you follow that link, you'll be connected to more of Jerel's thoughts and perspective on what has happened in his family. There's also much more about his ministry of writing quality Christian literature for young people. Just go to firstpersoninterview.com for more. And then, if you'd like to comment on what you've heard today or interact with us in any other way, please visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/firstpersoninterview. We'd love to hear from you there. Again, that's facebook.com/firstpersoninterview. We're also found on iTunes as a podcast, which you can download automatically. We have a number of people we want you to meet over the summer months here on First Person. You'll find the schedule of upcoming programs online at firstpersoninterview.com. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Plan to be with us next time for First Person.